Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Pare takuingoa. Hello and welcome to another session of Community Voices. What's Your Tūrangawaewae? I'll open us up with a karakia and then we'll get into the session. Kia hora tamarino, kia whakapapa po namu te moana. He horahi ma tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa. Huie tai kie. So welcome, I'm Pare and I work for Inclusive Aotearoa Collective Tahona, where we're working to create a fully inclusive Titiriti-based future for Aotearoa New Zealand. Our vision is of an Aotearoa where everybody has a place to belong and discrimination, racism and prejudice have become a thing of the past. And I'm so excited to be hosting this session around the concept of tūrangawaewae, which is a Māori way of expressing belonging. Engaging in conversations about tūrangawaewae allow us to sharpen a sense of the ground on which we stand and from which we see, relate and act. Among other things, for tauiwi, it helps to frame our relationship with Aotearoa New Zealand and Te Tiriti o Waitangi. I just want to get straight into it now and hear from our guests. So I'm going to introduce them. They are Dr. Evangelia Papoutsaki, who has a passion for social justice and is a social change communication scholar, editor, and published author and educator. We have Mandy Patmore, who's a freelance artist and director of Kakano Youth Arts Collective. And in 2020, she was awarded New Zealander of the Year Local Hero Medal for this work. Next, we have Ysabel Landingin, who is an urban planner and a project lead with Multi-Ethnic Youth Leaders New Zealand and part of Authenticity Aotearoa, delivering New Zealand's first Women of Colour conference. And lucky last would be Baruch, who is a strategic advisor, mentor and storyteller, whose clients include leading New Zealand startups, NGOs, iwi ventures and corporates. So welcome one, welcome all. And we're just going to make a start and perhaps Dr. Evangelia, I could come to you first. After you've said hello, maybe you could give us some reflections on the first question, which is what or where is your tūrangawaewae? What or where is your tūrangawaewae? Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me here today. I'm an islander by birth and by choice, and I also happen to be an island studies scholar, but I think you're asking me not who I am, but rather where I belong, right? And where my sense of home and roots are. I was born and brought up on a Mediterranean island in Crete, and for the last 35 years, I have been living and working in several and distinctively different communities around the world, including here in Aotearoa, which I call home now, a home of choice, along with my birth island home. So I think it's possible to have multiple homes and also choose where to belong. And I like quoting the African writer Haile Selassie's concept of multi-local people who feel at home in the town where they grew up, the city they live now, and maybe another place or two. So in this case, I'm a local to Auckland. I'm also local to Heraklion, the capital of Crete, and a couple of other places perhaps that have made me feel welcome. And these are not necessarily geographically or ethnically identified places, but rather communities of practice, like groups of women and social changers. And I'm trying in these cases to avoid mentioning countries as place of belonging, as I feel they don't represent who I am as a woman and as a feminist, with their very hard borders and rigid rules of belonging, very patriarchal perhaps in nature. Saying that, in conclusion, although all these places have had an impact on who I am and what I have become over the years, I'm strongly conditioned, and I'm quoting here Timothy Karetu, by the physical, cultural and social environment of the island in which I was brought up. And as Selassie says, culture exists in community and community exists in context. And geography, tradition, and collective memory are still very important.
Kia ora, that's a beautiful statement to end on. Thank you. Marie, maybe I could come to you next. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I might do a bit of an expanded introduction about who I am, because that feeds quite well into what Tūrangawaewae means to me. So nice to meet you all online people. My name's Marie. I identify these days as a third culture kid, or a Filipino New Zealander, 1.5 generation migrant. I'm Filipino by ethnicity, but New Zealander by nationality. I was born in Manila, raised in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, and currently reside in Hamilton, Kirikiriroa. I'm 22 years old, so I do not have all the wisdom of the world yet. I'm the eldest daughter of a family of 4 to Yvonne and Nathaniel, and my younger brother, Miguel. And I am fascinated truly by the concept of Tūrangawaewae, but I really struggle with it. My place to stand and my sense of home has always been quite abstract and evolving. So I agree with you, Evangelia. Like, it's not something that's a country, it's not a space, it's not a land or a place. In my 22 years, I've lived in 6 homes across 4 cities. So while I feel quite sentimental about places, I don't profoundly relate to them or whakapapa to anything. My parents moved around a lot as well. So my entire family isn't very familiar with the concept of Tūrangawaewae. But reflecting on what Tūrangawaewae is, and in recent years, as I've explored tikanga Māori more and learned to really appreciate the complexity of that concept, I associate it more relationally and about people. So for me, my Tūrangawaewae is about my people around me in my community, and I'll leave it there.
Kia ora. Kia ora. We've got a rich mix of cultures here. I'm really keen to hear more and expand on that through the questions. And maybe Baruch, I'm sure you'll add another layer. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Yeah, and I really resonated with everything that both of you have said so far. And I came to Aotearoa when I was 2. And so I'm kind of an insider outsider, and I definitely grew up here. And I grew up in Tauranga, and my primary school was 80% Māori. And so I was aware of the concept, the Māori concept of Tūrangawaewae from an early age. And it didn't resonate with me in the way that I saw it did with my peers. So, and I did wonder if Holland was home. You know, even though we were quite poor, and so I hadn't been back. And when I finally did go back to Holland, it wasn't there. It was clearly not home. And I was 14 years old, and I think I had an experience that a lot of Kiwis have, you know, when they travel, is that they realize that New Zealand does have a culture. You think maybe it doesn't, and you have to go find it. But for various reasons, I didn't find home in Holland, and even little things like the sense of humor was just off, you know, and you know, and the way people treated the environment was just off. And so that helped me feel much more at home in New Zealand as a whole. But then moving to Tamaki Makaurau to study, and then I married here, and I married into a Punjabi family, and so I very much don't feel at home in Tauranga. So again, the place where I was brought up, and it doesn't respect multicultural New Zealand in the way that Tamaki Makaurau does. And so that's starting to create a feeling in me of Auckland being my home. But just as you said, Marie, really what's made it my home is a circle of people that I can be myself with. And Valia, you talked about communities of practice, same thing, you know, a spiritual community, communities of friends. So a place where I can be myself. And reflecting for this talk, Tim, I realized if I was able to find those elsewhere, that would be my Tūrangawaewae. It's the people, the communities of practice, and the ability to be seen and feel comfortable. So it's, you know, as much as I've looked for it, I have not found that geographical place. It's like the others. It's something more abstract.
And you've found where it isn't but not yet where it is geographically.
Mm.
I like that concept of insider, outsider. Well, I don't like the concept, I like the term. So thank you for that. Kura, Mandy, where is your Tūrangawaewae?
Well, mine's a little different, I guess. Mine is very geographical and very localized. So I'm born and bred in West Auckland, to a quintessential West Auckland family. My father was a panel beater, my mother was a stay-at-home mum. I had a horse in the back paddock. We played out on the streets till it got dark. We built huts. Yeah, just your free-ranging, typical New Zealand childhood I was blessed to have. And I travelled in my youth, but found myself back in West Auckland. And so now I live in Karikari, which is the better beach on the west coast, just before Piha, without its own TV rescue show. And we've been living here for 20 years now, and so I have a very definite sense of Tūrangawaewae and of my community. So we have a wonderful community where we share meals, and when someone has a baby, dinner's brought to you for 2 weeks. We look after our elderly. We help each other out. If someone's got a tree that's fallen down in their paddock, then the community's there with chainsaws. So it's very much a community and very much a place where I feel I belong. And even in my work, actually, so in my work I work with West Auckland young people who've struggled throughout their entire lives, and I found myself, going through different kind of facets of my career until I found a place that makes sense to me, because I feel like we're giving back to the community. So even in my work, it's about trying to build a sense of belonging and a sense of community, not only for the young people that we work with, but also those that that might see what we're doing for the community. So for example, we have a gallery in the main street of Henderson, which I deliberately put there because it's a place which is really dead and there's not a lot of good positive energy. So we want to start building again that sense of belonging and bringing people together and inclusiveness. And so I find myself, when I sort of looked at what Tūrangawaewae means to me, I just thought how appropriate that was, because without even realizing it, I'm making it central to almost everything I do with my work and my home and my family and how I relate to the world. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I feel quite blessed to have a really strong sense of community. I know that it's something others long for, and I feel like it's really important. And I mean, traditionally we lived in a village structure, right? If we go back to almost every culture, we lived as a village and we cared for each other, and elderly weren't lonely or put in rest homes. Children were raised by many. I think that's how we should be living a little bit more and looking after each other a little bit more. So that's really important to me.
Kura, and I think although there's a definite physical space there, you've referenced a lot of people and relationships that bring that space, that extra layer and that meaning for you. So I think there's this common thread that is emerging around in this talk anyway, in this chat. And so maybe I'll stay with you, Mandy, and we'll just expand on that a little bit. And I guess that this might be a little bit more complex, but I hope you can draw it out for me. You've talked a little bit around that village and the village being so important and key in so many cultures, and maybe we've drifted away from it a little bit. So when you reflect on that, how does that tie in with any concept of Tūrangawaewae that you have that sits outside of Te Ao Māori? Like, have you been able to identify a similar concept within kind of Pākehā New Zealand, or is it too linked?
Yeah. So I grew up with a Māori grandmother who's not related to me by blood. So when people sort of ask that question, oh, are you Māori? But I'm whakapapa Māori. It's an unusual space to sit. So I'm totally Pākehā, but I have I had an upbringing which afforded me the wonderful opportunities to be, have a lot of time on the marae and have Māori cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents. But in saying that, it wasn't part of the discussions. Like, there's a lot more open discussion now about the inclusion of Te Ao Māori in our lives. But in my life, up until recently, it's just been lived experience. So it's not something that was openly discussed, it just was. So I did grow up with lots of people in our home. There was always someone sleeping on the floor or the couch, and the neighbours, you know, my mother raised the neighbours and my auntie lived next door. And so it was very natural for me. It wasn't a concept that I needed to learn or explore, it just was. And for me, that was, you know, a typical New Zealand childhood. And I think, and I've spent a bit of time in India actually, and I stayed with the family in India for a Punjabi wedding actually, which was quite a spectacular, memorable experience. And I recognized the same thing there. So there was 16 people living in that house, and everybody just, there wasn't really a strong ownership of space. Like there was no, this is my bedroom, you can't come in. It was a shared living situation, and that really resonated with me in the way that my experience of you know, of having Māori whānau does. There's just, everything is just shared, and multi-generational time spent together, and nobody's lonely. Yeah, so I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly, but it wasn't something I consciously thought about, it just was.
Kia ora. I'm not sure if it answers it exactly, but it answers it very nicely, so thank you for that. I'm going to keep the Punjabi link alive, and I'm going to go to Baruch next, and either to talk about that in your family at present, your family structure, or in your upbringing. Like, are there, you know, is there a similar concept that you've come across?
Yeah, I think a lot of cultures have it. So if I start with Holland, you know, it's known as the fatherland. Some have a motherland. For those Germanic cultures, it's a fatherland. And if you think of the famous Dutch names that you know, Rembrandt van Rijn, Van Rijn, you know, he's from the Rhine. You know, Terval, my surname is ashore. It's on the, there's a place on the edge of the sort of manufactured canal, or the concrete, the bricks on the side of the river that they have in Europe. So those places are important. And as I say, they didn't speak to me. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and so for them, Israel still is a special place. It's a place, it literally is a place where Jews have a Tūrangawaewae, a place to stand at all times. Even if they don't go there, they know they can. And I had the opportunity to visit there, and you know, it's even called the Promised Land. So you know, the notion of mana whenua resonates quite loudly with Jewish people, but again, I did not feel it when I was there. It was not at all my home. There were some cultural resonances that I recognized, and because I've got Jewish whakapapa, I was welcomed in, and you know, that fellowship made me feel quite at home, but it you know, wasn't tied to the land. Punjabis are huge explorers. You find them in every country in the world. Canada is like second Punjab now, as an example. And so, but that family unit that Mandy was describing is kind of grounds the belonging. So, so I guess the various cultures I'm affiliated with do have the concepts, but they weren't accessible to me. I guess my third culture is as a Pākehā New Zealander, and so you know, New Zealand is home. But I just wanted to reflect again on Mandy's village, not concept, village reality. So I want to live in a village, and I try to create that around me, or contribute to those who are creating it, and it might be a bit dispersed. But and in hearing Mandy talk, it doesn't have to be in a particular place. It doesn't have to be in kare for me. You know, if life circumstances took me to a place, I'd look for a village to be part of there. And maybe that's part of the privilege of having a white face, is that you don't feel marginalized, and so you can find your village in different places. But I like that phrasing. Thank you, Mandy. That in a way, that's what I'm looking for, is to be part of a village. But I feel confident, you know, guiltily confident that I can find it in a lot of different places if I needed to.
Yeah, I know I'm a facilitator, but I can resonate with that that seamless sense of belonging that we can create for ourselves on kind of colonized land. And yeah, so thanks for recognizing that. Marie, third culture kid, any similar concepts that you hold dear or you've come across?
I am just in agreement with what everyone else has been saying. I was going to initially answer this question with no, not really. And then it sort of transitioned to, I don't think so. And I'm just confused. But I think confusion is a big defining factor of being this really mixed identity of a third culture kid. And then going back to that question, it's like, well, what is my culture even? Like that's another thing to really think about as well. But I think I need to give some light to my Filipino ethnicity. So as a Filipino, again, I can only speak to my lived experiences, and that being a non-Tagalog speaking Filipino who grew up in New Zealand. So hopefully in a few years' time, when I've grown older and wiser, I can come back with more knowledge from my Filipino heritage about how to answer this. But from what I've grown up with, I've always seen that Filipino culture is very relational, very people-oriented. It's about family and community. There is a village sort of community as well. In the Philippines, it's because of our love of family that a lot of Filipinos go overseas to work abroad. So this concept of OFWs, of overseas Filipino workers, is a huge thing. There's a huge Filipino diaspora. We're known as very hospitable people who work as domestic helpers because we're everywhere. But it's a huge deal in the Philippines. Again, children are not often expected to leave their parents' house until they're married. And we never send our parents to retirement homes. We're very family oriented. So family is probably where belonging begins and where belonging ends in the Philippines for Filipinos. As a third culture kid, though, as a 1.5 generation migrant, things are often quite transient and quite impermanent. So having a solid sense of belonging is a challenge. Sometimes, back to what Baruch was saying, sometimes I just wish I had that strong connection in that village that I've learned from Tikanga Māori and others. And I've always longed for it. But looking back, family was always present. So I think family has always been a cycle of I belong with family, and then in other ways, growing up in Auckland, I felt that I needed more to belong. I couldn't just belong to family. So I went on this journey when I was younger of feeling detached from my Filipino family culture. I don't even speak Tagalog, so I think that was a huge barrier as well. And I found myself adapting and exploring a lot when I grew up as a teenager. I explored lots of communities and friends. I did a brief stint with Pare magazine. I don't know, Mandy, if you remember, but I actually interviewed you once for Pare magazine about kōrero. But I was really young back then, so like I even don't recognize myself back then. But things like that, when I started to expose myself to all the communities out there doing great things, I started to be really interested in how do I create belonging when there's so much belonging out there for myself. And I found a lot of excitement in that, a lot of novelty, exploring that everyone's finding their different place of belonging. But again, it's always going back to, yeah, I still don't know where I am though. And what's funny as well, after all of that, I spent a considerate amount of my adolescent years in Auckland. So I found stability in my community, my family and my friends here in Auckland. But just 3 months ago, I decided to move to Hamilton. So now I've started afresh again, and I'm having to explore my identity in absence of that stable community that I've found. But it's interesting. I thought it would be really challenging, but we've got the benefits of social media. We've got this weird virtual world, and the concept is abstract. So because even though I was geographically separated from my community, I never really felt detached. And I think because I've had to go through all of those cycles of exploring where I am, where I'm not, and who I belong to, who I'm who my community is, I've just learned to adapt so much better. So to me, as a third culture kid, as a 1.5 generation migrant, Tūrangawaewae is dynamic, it evolves, and at the end of the day, again, it's people oriented. So back to whether this concept exists in my culture, confused.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for all those reflections. Belongings where Filipino community starts and belongings where it ends was really powerful. And we'll certainly have you back on when you're older and wiser, but those were wise words. So thanks ever so much. Thalia, anything to add? Like what any similar concept?
Actually, similar and dissimilar in a sense that I know where my feet are standing in the present and in the past. And I have a very strong linguistic, emotional connection to my motu, original motu. And that helps me to tap into as a resource to understand what is happening around me in the world. So this concept that we're exploring today, there are a couple of ways that it comes up in my Cretan culture. One refers to the place, a physical place, and the other refers to your whakapapa. So the question of apopuini irizesu, and translates directly, where are your roots holding to? Is conveying that sense that there's something active in that question that I like, that my roots still hold me where I am in the present place. I didn't uproot, because often when we talk about roots and belonging and we go in other place, it's like, oh, you have been uprooted. My roots are there, they're stretching. So therefore these roots, rhizes in Greek, it's more akin to rhizomes. Yeah, rhizomes, I don't know how to pronounce that properly. As rhizomes are more resilient, more flexible, more communicative, and more adaptable. But it's the other question. When I was growing up in Crete, in smaller communities, the question wasn't so much where you're from, because hey, your looks, your surname, your accent, Cretan accent is very specific, would automatically confirm your belonging to the motu or a particular part of the island. However, there was one question, the second most important question in regards to this concept, which is pianu ise, and it means to whom do you belong? And to me, that is a direct question about your whakapapa. Your genealogy was a primary identifier in my community, a way of recognizing who you are through your people and therefore where you belong. And in this case, to a human collective. And it resonates very well with what Mandy was saying, that, you know, belonging, and also to Baruch and Maria, that we belong to human collectives. And that our whakapapa is a way of declaring our belonging.
Kura, I love that. Where are your roots holding to, and to whom do you belong? Thank you for sharing those. I think we'll go straight on, because I'm keen to hear as much as possible. We've got a couple of minutes maybe each on the next one, which is, what words, icons, images or objects do you use to describe your Tūrangawaewae, or would you use to describe your Tūrangawaewae? What words, icons, images or objects do you use to describe your Tūrangawaewae? I'm going to just keep on moving around, and Mandy, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to
yeah, I guess my child. So I grew up in Sunnyvale, which I don't know if you know West Auckland, but back then it was quite rural, and I had a horse, and there was a lot of bush, and my dad was a hunter who raised 3 daughters, 2 of whom are vegan. So, but I was very much brought up on the land and knowing how to hunt and where meat came from, and our weekends would be spent taking a sheet of black polythene out into the bush and using rocks to hold it down over a tree branch, and very much on the land. So and that's huge to me in my life. So I live right in the bush on the west coast. my arts practice is about environmental issues and deforestation and habitat loss in Aotearoa. It's what I do in my time. I'm a backcountry tramper, so those formative years for me spent on the land and right in the bush, it's just who I am all the way right to the depth of my soul. So yeah, I maybe not an image or a thing, but just the being immersed in the bush and getting my hands dirty, and I guess gumboots, swan dries, they were pretty big in the images that I think of. Getting firewood, just real rugged on the land stuff.
Kōrero. Baruch.
I thanks to Mandy, I now would use village as a great word for, you know, what I mean by Tūrangawaewae, but you know, prepping for the session, the first thing that came into my head, literally came into my head, was eyes closed and a feeling of peace. Like you know it if you have it. And then if I was imagining where I was sitting in a circle of other people, you know, a diverse group of other people, and felt like I belonged in that circle and was seen and was seeing others. So that's those were just the pictures that came.
Sounds like a nice place. I'll come along. Marie, what comes up for you?
Again, it's going back to family. So for me personally, I think of my lounge at home. We've got this lounge where we've got these two couches facing each other, and behind them there's frames and interesting decor, because my mom loves decor, lots of plants, but it's very homely. But to me, the most important thing is all of the photos on those shelves, all the photo albums, because for me, Tūrangawaewae is about the people and the memories that I've made with those people. So having that space to commemorate that those have happened all in one place, to be able to live in the present and still be able to see those memories in the past is, yeah, what I kind of associate with Tūrangawaewae. As a third culture kid, a lot of images come up though. There's that image of having a foot in two different worlds. So you've got one foot there, one foot there, walking on a tightrope. When I've struggled with my different identities, I see it as a balancing act, where in some situations I feel I lean as more of a New Zealander than a Filipino, and I really struggle to get that balance. But overall, it's that family home, it's that lounge, it's that comfortable place where you've built up over time with all the people around you. So yeah, the memories that you create with the village that you've created your sense of community with.
I love that. I love that. And the importance of those photos to, as you said, commemorate those memories and those relationships. Thank you. Valia.
Well, did I say I'm an islander? Clearly, islandscapes are the images that come up, and that's why perhaps I feel so comfortable here in Aotearoa, surrounded by water. But I think belonging is something that is experienced both individually and collectively through all our senses, and also in a kind of Buddhist way, in a manner of through awareness and consciousness, right? Personally, for me, the dialect, the language, the words are very important, especially the dialect that my grandmother used to speak to me, and which I feel returning to in times I need emotional comfort. Language is one of the deepest ways I think we are expressing and feeling belongingness. And I was just reading yesterday an article in The Guardian in Catalonia, where 1 in 5 people are migrants, and a lot of them come from Morocco, and they speak 1 or 2 predominantly languages. There's a new project of getting migrants to teach their language to locals as an invitational act from the locals to belong. And the result of these migrants being able to teach their language to the host country has been amazing. So there is that deep connection, individual and collective, to the words and the way we make sense to the world, of the world around us.
Thank you. It's amazing what things bring us our emotional comfort, isn't it? Like in those times. I want to go straight on to the next one, because I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking I just want to get squeeze as much wisdom and richness out of this conversation as possible. So this one's a little bit more forward thinking, I guess. What can we do to ensure everyone in Aotearoa New Zealand can find and talk about their tūrangawaewae, their place of belonging? Who haven't I picked on to go first? Baruch, I think I might come to you first on this one.
Sure.
What can we do to ensure everyone in Aotearoa New Zealand can find and talk about their tūrangawaewae, their place of belonging?
I feel like diverse hui, diverse wānanga, diverse kōrero, talanoa like this are quite important, because you know, if you only hear a few voices, like if you hear Mandy talk about her connection to place, and then you hear tangata whenua talk about connection to a particular marae, you can think there's something wrong with you and that you need that and you will just never have it. So actually hearing, you know, strong women like Valia and Marie talk about their tūrangawaewae, and then, you know, if we had another dozen people, we'd have another dozen different takes. And I think that's quite important for people to be able to see that there's not just one way. Otherwise, I think can almost lead to mental ill health. And I guess, so the diversity is one thing. And I guess another one, if we're talking particularly about trying to find it in Aotearoa, is building relationships with mana whenua, if as much as you can. Like you slipped it in before, Tim, when you said, you know, we walk in a colonized land, and you have to feel comfortable, you have to feel like you're giving more than you're taking. And in the end, that just comes down to relationships. And if we're here as tangata tiriti and we feel welcome because we have relationships with tangata whenua and we found ways to be, you know, of service or just to have friendships, then that changes the whole nature of it. And probably for me, that's part of what's making Tāmaki Makaurau more a home for me, is working with various iwi and hapu and feeling like I've earned the right to feel at home here because I'm trying to give more than I take.
Yeah, I love that. And a friend said to me once, and I think it might even have been you, Baruch, that in terms of the relationship with tangata whenua, we need to come in through the front door and not come in through the back door, and that's important to the sense of belonging. So, Marie, I'd like to come to you next, if that's all right.
Sure. I think it goes down to ensuring that there is access to these sorts of opportunities to learn about these concepts and to have storytelling. So kind of leapfrogging off what Baruch's saying, I guess with my lived experience, I'd like to see a lot more sensitivity and normalization of the cultural confusion around not knowing what your tūrangawaewae is, and being able to bring that to the dinner table and talk about that with your parents as well, and just normalization of that. Leading into the spaces that I work in, though, by profession, I work in the urban planning and transport planning space. So it's all about creating the cities and the infrastructure that that societies need. There are certain voices that are quite underrepresented at those influential decision-making tables. So that means that some communities risk being underrepresented and therefore unable to access physical spaces and opportunities. And when you don't have the basics like hard physical infrastructure or soft cultural infrastructure like the education systems or the financial systems readily available to you, how can you find comfort and belonging? You don't have the infrastructure to help you even think about that sort of stuff. So I'm really passionate about ensuring that everyone does have access to these opportunities, whether it's physical infrastructure and the soft infrastructure, to thrive. And belonging is a really key part of that. So for instance, making sure that we have good representation at those decision tables, designing the spaces that we live, work, and play with all the different people in mind, well-represented leadership. So that starts with youth. So young people should have opportunities available to them from a young age. They should know that Tūrangawaewae is a concept available to them, and it's not a certain one-size-fits-all. Facilitating community connection, like these sorts of hui, discussion and collective change. And I like what you were saying, Baruch, as well, that feeling like you have an opportunity to make a difference in the space that you're in and serve that community is really important, to feel like you belong there, because that means you have power, you have the ability to take part. And that's a big part of being part of a community and belonging.
Wonderful leapfrogging. And I highly encourage leapfrogging, as you put it, Marie. Yeah, thanks ever so much. That concept of, if you haven't got the physical infrastructure, how can you develop the connection and the belonging, and that being such a barrier. Balia, do you have anything to add? The longer it goes on, the more ideas are being put out. So I'm sure you've got some to add.
I think, to me, Tūrangawaewae essentially means to be included. And how do you foster inclusiveness? By stop practicing attentional violence. And this is a concept that was developed by Otto Scharmer from MIT in the US, who says that when we are not engaging in deep listening, we are committing attentional violence, and that's the first step towards alienation. So in order to rectify attentional violence, we need to engage in a deeper listening process that involves not only an open mind, although this is a prerequisite in a way. An open mind brings curiosity and allows you to question whether the facts and the knowledge you have still hold. But open mind without curiosity of, I'm open to know about things that I don't know and I haven't explored, and I'm open to that. But that's not enough. He says that we also need to listen from an open heart. And he's using this very beautiful concept of presencing, which is a combination word of being present and sensing. So it's not enough in a highly culturally diverse society to be present in each other's lives, and bingo, we are having a multi and diverse society, but also that we are sensing, we are feeling the other. Because without feeling, without essentially stepping on the other person's shoes, the migrant, the person with the accent, the person that has a different skin color, the other, then you cannot move into that next step of deep listening that he is advocating, which is open will. And he says that, it's not enough to just say, I'm open-minded, I'm very inclusive, I like everyone being the same as me. You have to really follow that solidarity, this expression of solidarity with action. Yeah, do something about it. And it links a little bit to Eastern philosophies that he's tapping into, Buddhism, that if you listen to the other as if we are all from the same source, that you are not an other, you're not the other, you and I are part of one, then you are more engaged in what happens in this other person's life that seems to be marginalized and not being included. So yeah, so to answer briefly your question, to foster and nurture inclusiveness and belongingness, we all need to come from a space of generosity of spirit that brings an open mind and an open heart, and also recognizes that we are all of the same source.
Beautiful. I'm going to go and do some reading on presencing after this, so thank you for bringing that up. I think there's a link also to what Baruch was saying there around your solidarity and that movement into action. And then Baruch talking about the need to give more than you take when you're coming into a community and you're trying to foster that sense of Tūrangawaewae. Mandy.
Yeah, this is really relevant to my kind of thinking. So I really related to what you were saying, Baruch, about those that don't have, a really strong sense of community. It can affect your mental health, and you just, what's wrong with me? And I can't fit. I'm well aware that I'm blessed geographically. I think it happens naturally in small towns anyway, that there is a sense of community, probably more so in big cities. So I think those living in bigger land masses are at a disadvantage in terms of finding connection. I do feel very strongly that Tūrangawaewae isn't about necessarily, as we've discussed, a physical place or about whānau. It really is just about belonging. So I think there is, in a larger space. So for example, my work is in Henderson and West Auckland. It's a larger landmass. It's harder to bring people together, but it's really important to do that. And I think that you mentioned, Marie, about infrastructure. I think that's really important. However, I think things need to come from grassroots level. I worked for a long time in local government, and there was lots of actions, lots of council doing things for the community that the community hadn't asked for and didn't really, they didn't work. So I think grassroots movements are really important, and there needs to be lots of funding, lots of support to grow that so that people can find their own connections, and then those connections are nurtured and given the space and the support that they need to grow. Yeah, so I think it's fundamentally, for me, the most important thing in my life is genuine connection. And I think it's harder as we become there's more globalization and less. We have a nation of people that have not been born here as well, so it's harder for people to connect. And I just think anything that fosters a place and space where people can get together and share common interests, that's where belonging starts, and that should be nurtured as much as possible.
Kia ora. Yeah, and thank you, and thanks to everyone for the answers to those questions, which is the kind of formal set questions that you've seen. And now I'm going to get you to think a little bit off the cuff, because we've had a couple of questions come in that I'm going to move into. And the first one of these that I'm going to go to is, and I've popped it in the chat so that you can all read it, because it's quite a long. I've heard lots of nature references and concepts from back in the day in this discussion, but do you think there's some kind of modern take on this, particularly for those who are geographically, linguistically disconnected and/or mobile moving between real and online spaces, trying to find where they belong, especially where lots of culture, languages, histories have been lost? So there's a couple of parts to that, right? But I think essentially in the modern world, now that we have digital nomads, we're all working in a kind of individual spaces more and more. Is there some kind of modern take on what we've discussed? I'm going to throw it open to anyone who's brave enough to have a crack at that one.
So I'm going to just suggest the simplest thing. And I with COVID and the world moving online more and more, I don't know, and this might be contentious, but I don't necessarily think it's particularly healthy for people. I think that it's really important that we have physical connection, and at risk of having, interactions that make you unwell with COVID kicking about. I think potluck dinners are really good. It's just the simplest thing, but just even within small communities with the neighbors, it's just a case sometimes of reaching over the fence and saying, hey, do you want to share a meal together? And being the person in your community maybe that instigates a street party, and you take a picnic out on the road. And just the simplest ways to connect with people, I think, are really important. And that was always something that happened, kind of back in the day, is that people would maybe get together a little bit more in the town hall. But in absence of those old sort of structures, I think there are ways that we can do it in a really modern and simplistic way. It doesn't have to be overthought.
Yeah, just building on that, I'm the same, that I think there's a modern take, but I don't feel like it's a metaverse take. I also am old-fashioned enough to think that that's not healthy for us. And you've got people like Ockham in Auckland who are building the modern take, which is, how can you make an apartment complex feel more like a village, with the kids sharing a homework area, sharing appliances, sharing infrastructure. It made me think of it, Marie, when you were talking about that hard infrastructure, like we can build in a way where we have neighbors, and so even if you are transient, that you have neighbors. I had a friend who grew up in Singapore, and the thing she said she missed most in New Zealand was the apartment buildings in Singapore, where, like there was no such thing as a babysitter, because if your parents had to go out, there were 10 other people in the building that you could go stay with. And, when you were talking that Kiwi childhood, you and I had Mandy ranging around freely. They'd roam around in the building in safety, so I feel like there are modern takes, but I'm afraid, to our question, that I have to agree that I'd love to see it result in an actual human, a modern take to recreate human physical connection, not try to solve it virtually.
Yeah, it's not a question of either or modern or pre-COVID or post-COVID, as we are highly adaptable humans, and we constantly seek to find ways to connect. As a result of COVID, I started running a community of practice with young social changers online. And that's great. I'm grateful for the opportunity that the technology and circumstances have provided me with creating this new community of practice. But at the same time, what I've noticed is that I'm more grounded in the local now. There was this story in the news the other day where people, because they stay in the suburbs now, because they work from home, the local communities are strengthened, the local cafe. There are more cafes actually popping up, and the shops in the neighborhoods are seeing more clients, strengthening the local economy, the community economy, and social interaction. What I also noticed is that we do have a stronger sense to nature now. We crave to be connecting to the land in ways that perhaps we should take for granted in the past. So there's something that is changing but remains still the same. We still need to have a connection.
Yeah, tautoko everyone, what everyone's saying. Working in a space, an urban planning space, where we're creating these physical spaces that have historically meant that people are geographically distanced from places, and also being in the generation that's thriving in the mobile age. It's really interesting getting this sort of question, because as a young person, I agree with what everyone's been saying. I am sad that a lot of my younger 20 years have been spent online in lockdown. But unfortunately, is sort of a reality for some. I think to sort of both W's who are, because they want to financially support their families, they have no choice but to be away from their families. And unfortunately, that is a reality for people. So in a way, the mobile world can be a real useful tool to instill that sense of belonging when you can't get the geographic connection. But it is sort of like making sure whichever opportunity is there, anyone can access any opportunity that best suits them as much as possible. If you could bridge those geographic connections, physical connections, that would be the best. But if the mobile world is for you as well, that's also available. So I'm in a way grateful, despite all of the heartache and horrible stuff that COVID's brought, that it's challenged the way that we've traditionally done things. And I'm hopeful that after we realize the challenges of COVID, that we'll come out of it thinking, maybe you should think about things a bit differently. It'll be a really interesting world in the next few years, I'd say.
Yeah, I think interesting is one of many adjectives we could probably use for what the world might be like in the next few years, but certainly better for conversations like this, I think. And I want to do a quick whip round on one more question that's come in. And I think we've only got time for about a minute each on this, if that's okay. But why do you feel it's a struggle for some to feel a sense of belonging? And I guess we have referred to this and it's been referenced. And Marie, maybe I'll start with you, because I think you have perhaps talked to this a little bit previously, but why do you feel it's a struggle for some to feel a sense of belonging in Aotearoa? Is there anything you want to add to what you've said earlier?
Yeah, it's funny. That's a hard one, because that's basically what we've been talking about all afternoon. I think part of it is, I didn't speak to this before, but there are stories when I grew up where being different is a real weakness, and not being able to feel comfortable to talk about your difference. And it's funny because New Zealand, I think in some ways is harder than other places when it comes to, for instance, racism, because it's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more, you really have to like think about it. And sometimes you experience it so much that you're like, oh, that microaggression actually really affected me so much. And I think being very quiet, and I think New Zealand hasn't really fully dealt with that well yet. The fact that we haven't really well addressed that makes it really hard to feel belonging. And while there are ways that we're trying to create belonging, and we've spoken about those things, and we've found sense of belonging, I think those barriers still exist. And we really need to find a way to make sure that the next generation of people and the people of today don't need to continue experiencing that. And it is definitely a collective effort.
Baruch, do you want to jump in? You talked previously about this a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking about the third culture kids I'm friends with. One of the things that makes it hard for them is whether a hybrid culture is a legitimate thing to be proud of. You know, because you can be like, oh, I'm not a proper Somali, but I'm not a proper Kiwi. I'm not a proper Punjabi. I'm not a proper, you know, and so, you know, or can you say that, you know, that I'm both, and it's legitimate for me to be who I am. I think that's kind of the challenge, and it comes in places like women's rights. You know, that if I fully embrace that culture, am I buying into a sort of patriarchal thing that I just can't, because I find it disgusting? And, you know, so I think navigating that hybrid space is one of the real challenges.
Sure. Mandy, did you catch the question? Because I know you had to drop out for a bit. You're on mute, Mandy.
Sorry, my internet, the West Coast is a beautiful place, but the internet is not always that stable. So I missed slightly some of the discussion that was happening.
Oh, that's okay. It's just a quick, and we've only got a minute each for you and Valia, but it's a quick one on why do you feel it's a struggle for some to feel a sense of belonging in Aotearoa? So maybe I'll go to Valia first and give you just a second to gather some thoughts. Valia.
I don't know if this is specific to Aotearoa. I think this is the curse of most modern societies that become recipients of large migratory populations. I think it's also this patriarchal take of identity that is linked to the nation. It has, you know, so, and pure national identity. You're Greek or Italian and you can be either or. But also here in Aotearoa, I think there is a collective still not dealt with guilt about the impact of colonialism. And that is always underplaying in every interactions we have. If you're white, if you're not white, where do you belong?
Yeah, thank you. Mandy, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I have kind of harped on about the village structure a lot, and it doesn't need to be a physical thing, but I think we have become so removed from that it's really hard for people to find their way back to it. And if you're new to the country, everything is strange and different, and people don't kind of knock on neighbours' doors and ask to borrow sugar anymore. I just think there's a loss of connection, and why that is probably a whole other hour-long discussion. But yeah, I think people have kind of maybe gotten into the habit of not interacting so much. So maybe it's, you know, people are sort of shy and socially awkward and find that hard to reach out to others. So there are things that are, you know, there's things that are put in place. I know that there's in Greyland community, they have dinners on Friday nights for, you know, different groups of people. So I think it's just a case of people trying to get out of their comfort zone and reach out and just be brave sometimes to start a thing, to start a connection.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess also people who find that a bit easier, maybe welcoming in as well and doing that piece. I'm going to have to move towards the close now. So I think the thing that I'll take from this really is the concept of the village, the recognition of that cultural confusion that many people feel and that tightrope that people walk, the presencing that we really need to do, and listening with the open hearts, and more than anything, that need to connect, and the fact that people form such a key part of everybody's, in this conversation anyway, everyone's notion of what Tūrangawaewae is. Both people from the past through memories and people from today reaching over the neighbour's fence to help them out and make sure that they're not feeling isolated. So I'd like to give a big mihi to you all for sharing these rich stories, very personal insights, and your experiences. We're incredibly grateful to you all for that, and mihi nui. And just to say that if you want to see more of these, we've got another one coming up on Friday, the 6th of May, another Community Voices session. You can sign up to our e-news on our website, follow us on social media at IACT, and get in touch if you'd like to collaborate. So thank you all for watching. Thanks to our panelists for their rich whakaaro. And I'd now like to close the session with a karakia. Ka whakairi te tapu, kia watia ai te ara, kia turaki whakataha ai, kia turaki whakataha ai, homie, huie, tai kie.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.